I have to laugh. As a master animal and interspecies communicator, I often get called out for you're anthropomorphizing. And I have to laugh about that because the thing is that anthropomorphizing tends or lends to the perception that I'm giving human qualities to an animal. I've worked with thousands and thousands of animals over my career. And what's fascinating is learning how much higher of an awareness of emotional intelligence, of physical, psychological, and spiritual intelligence that these animals actually possess. So we talk about training, and then there's this whole theory on behavior sciences of training for animals. Yet not a single one of those behavioral sciences takes into account the actual consciousness of the animals. There's human-derived studies and experiments based on human thinking, human perception, and human interpretation that then the humans say, this is how animals behave. But none of that, nothing of any of the modern day training sciences takes into account the actual consciousness of those animals, because none of them are actually taking into account these animals are conscious. None of these experiences or experiments or studies take into account talking with the animals and asking them what their perception is of this. So you kind of get to see that after a while, wait a minute, how can you actually talk about animal behavior, understand truly the roots of it, the whys, the hows, how mama dogs train their puppies, how the alphas actually behave and why they've been given that terminology, how they understand energy, how are they able to do what they do, how are they able to become so efficient, how are they able to bring out the best behaviors in each other, oh, dare I say, without us humans? They don't need us. As a matter of fact, they would actually do way better without us being around, especially the wild animals. The domesticated animals fall into a couple of different categories. Those animals that we eat, that we believe can have for food. The wild animals will fall into that category too, but because they're wild, at least they can live in their social structures, not being slaves of us humans. And yes, I did actually say slaves, because when you purchase a life and believe that you have a right to that life which supersedes that life's autonomy, yes, it is a slave. Whether your ego can handle that or not, that's what you're going to have to work out. However, we've got the domesticated animals that we purchase for foods. We have the domesticated animals that we purchase for our pleasure. And they really kind of fall into those two categories. So one, aside from livestock, we fall into, okay, I have that horse because I want to ride this horse in this discipline. I have this dog because I want to compete in this XYZ. I have this cat. Well, we all know cats can't really be controlled. they were probably one of the smarter species, right? We learn ways of being with these animals. We learn ways of supposedly quote unquote behavior training that are human induced, when the humans don't even understand the actual energy language that these animals work with or through. They don't understand that an animal's first form of communication is telepathy, and it's pictures, not words. They don't understand, especially in modern day science, that animals in the wild, they don't give their kids treats every time they do something well, because animals in the wild, and even domesticated animals, you will see this with mama dogs, that all of a sudden, their puppies are doing all kinds of stuff, and you've seen the videos, right? Mom gets pissed, she lays down the law, and all the kids get respectful. That's not aversive training. That's the reality of being deeply grounded in one's being, knowing who one is, knowing that one is in charge and responsible for where the energies of these other little beings go, because they could get out of control, especially if they get bigger. And it's not that you want them in control, you want them understanding how to best harness their energy and how to best self-regulate themselves. Because when they understand that, and they're not all emotionally fucked up because someone was way over praising them or way over doing something or not correcting a behavior when it needed to be corrected, they become really integrated and in themselves and really highly valuable members of their pack or their society. So when I get called out for supposedly anthropomorphizing, I have to laugh because the kids or the parents, or the people that are friends that are like sitting around and then start utilizing funny comments about what their animals would say or, what their animals are thinking. The truth be told, that's the actual anthropomorphization, because we humans have never been taught how incredibly conscious these beings are. And not only their levels of consciousness of understanding exactly what's happening and understanding exactly what's going on, but that they're actually standing by to teach us how to heal our own emotional immaturity. I wrote a book with my horse called Sittings with Cisco, Conversations with a Paint Medicine Horse, about healthy emotional behavior for humanity. That horse called me out every time I was with him, teaching me and training me because I was open to listen about my off-base, immature, emotional understandings that I was raised with, that I carried forth in the world. And it was through being willing to have my ego completely obliterated of any sort of rightness about anything, but truly, deeply desiring, even though I didn't realize it at the time, consciously, being willing to be shown the truth of how do I grow up, how do I come back into right relationship with all of these animals and life, how do I come back into right relationship with humans, what is the human or who is the human I choose to be, how do I get from reaction to response, how do I start to understand how to really deeply listen, what's happening under the surface here. How do I become intimate with myself? How do I call myself out on my own shit instead of perpetuating more of it in the world? So, do I anthropomorphize? No. I call it like I see it because that's what the animals taught me once I opened my ears and cleaned the shit out of my own ears. Who they are and what they're really here teaching me and teaching us. Are you willing to do the same? You see, the thing is, how we learn can either be really controlled and indoctrinated to induce certain behaviors that might be beneficial for some in our human world. And we are taught very deliberately to ignore our instincts. We are taught very deliberately what the narrative is. And we're supposed to learn the narrative. That's what our mass indoctrinated education is really about. Learn the narrative. We tell you what it is. We tell you how it is. And don't be divergent and go outside of this. Because things don't work that way. Well, when you start studying with nature, you start allowing yourself to realize that we are not the superior species, that we are a species that has been very, very hijacked and traumatized and terrorized against the truth of who we really are in a natural, organic way. You start to see that returning back to nature, you start to see that returning back to and listening and learning from the animals is really our ultimate education. Remembering to learn from Mother Earth, remembering to learn from all of her species, the way that all the indigenous cultures have learned. Because when you really take a look at the indigenous cultures, there's no mass wars like we have. There's no mass poverty like we have. We've been taught to look down on them because certain people have had a clear agenda that they wanted to make things look a certain way of what you should be striving for. But remember something. They set up a system. So regardless of how much money you make, you could be a billionaire, you could be a trillionaire, you're still going to be a slave to the system. And what you're going to do is you're going to enslave and try to control others so you can keep what you believe you've earned. And see how that works? And you start hanging out with animals, and you start realizing that's not the value system of nature. That's actually not the value system of true freedom. And you start to compare that to our world where everything is about an enslavement of sorts to the system that you're not supposed to see outside of. Whether people you love are dying, whether there's droughts everywhere, whether the weather's going crazy, whether your kids are getting autism at alarming rates, whether people are getting sick and dying from really unnatural health issues. You know, when you see the skies being sprayed with poisons, when you see the waters being toxified, when you see the food is now genetically modified and engineered, like, there's nothing natural about that. It's a very complicated system. And the complication literally comes from the fact that people are deriving massive amounts of money from it. Not because it's right. It's not even because it's God's way. It's actually the going against of God's way. And yet this is what we have come to believe. This is what we've become indoctrinated to, so that we behave a certain way. So think about it as applied to, a dog being trained with treats. That's not a natural training. It's what humans developed over the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years to motivate an animal to do something because they wouldn't do it naturally. And when I hear trainers these days, younger trainers usually say, but that's the way it works. It's like, you have never studied nature in your life. You're clueless. You studied from a human who told you that, and that human doesn't even know that that's not true. So when we look at this whole concept of anthropomorphization, I'm going to call it out as anthropomorphize has actually been reversed in the wrong direction. So people that are saying, people like myself who can communicate with animals, with nature, empaths and sensitives, and people that are aware of who we really are and what we're really capable of, when they put that on me, that I'm giving emotion, I'm giving thought to that animal, when all I'm doing is literally listening and channeling the information from that animal of how they're really feeling and what's taking place in their body, so I can help assist them in shifting it in the simplest way without thousands of dollars of diagnostic tools that haven't even figured out that animal was emotionally tormented, or they're carrying something which is creating this dis-ease in their body that they need to be heard about and they need to express so they can let it go and move on and reclaim their health. That's not anthropomorphization. But sitting around with a group of friends being like, so he would say this or he would say that, that's the actual anthropomorphization. Because they're not even in touch with their actual intimacy of being a human. They're not even in touch with the intimacy of the soul that they live with, who's in an animal body all of the time. And they're training that animal into a type of learned helplessness because they want the benefit of saying, I can trust my animal listens to me all the time, or, if it's horses, my animal's able to do this, or they're able to do that. That's the anthropomorphization of throwing their human perspective on a being that is so much more highly conscious than they are. So I'm calling it out for what it is. So my takeaway from all of this, for all of us, is that we have been mass indoctrinated into an education that is a narrative that certain faction of people did not want us to know who we truly are, did not want us to know who the animals truly are. But Source, the Creator, has always known who the animals are. And the animals, and this is strictly my opinion, took a vow of silence to help see how intelligent we really are. Because even though we can speak, that does not mean we're superior, and it does not mean that we're intelligent. As a matter of fact, in many ways, I think we're less intelligent the more that we speak. Because speaking should come from a place inside of your being where you are deeply and intimately connected with yourself and your source. And when you say something, those words are coming from a very deep place inside of you. For most of us, totally, those words are coming from a superficial place that thinks it understands. The brain might understand concepts, but the brain doesn't feel. So the brain doesn't truly understand if something is actual truth. Truth can only be felt, not thought. And that is where understanding these animals at a soul level and knowing why we love them so much is because they're so authentic, because they're so honest, because they're so intimate with themselves. And I really do truly believe that once we start to recognize that that is the place we've been going and looking for ourselves to truly understand ourselves, we'll finally understand our behaviors, their behaviors, and the truth about consciousness as the soul beings we all are. What's your perspective? And in this arena of talking about behaviors, we also have to talk about what are natural behaviors, what are learning-induced behaviors, and what is truly freedom. So having a puppy and going, okay, I have to train it. Well, that's true, because that puppy needs to know, don't run out in the street. Don't follow people that aren't, you. How to play and socialize in healthy ways. But here's the thing. If you're a human and you're trying to train a horse or a dog from a quote-unquote human perspective, the one thing that none of us really realize, I don't want to say none of us, I believe Cesar Millan really, really understands this. And it's a shame that so many positive reinforcement trainers and no force trainers don't understand the role of healthy boundaries and believe that they can manipulate behavior training that has always been about the mom's clear energy and the way that she carries herself and conducts herself, which is how she lands up informing her kids of what's healthy behavior and what's not. Because she's grounded in herself. She knows herself. She's not insecure. She's not looking for everybody else to tell her what to do. She's got her 6 kids and she's got to take care of them, and it's what she does. She doesn't question herself. So when we started introducing treats to bribe behaviors, because don't fool yourself, you're not more deeply connected and more intimately connected with your animal because you have treats. You're actually less intimately connected. You think you're getting the behavior you want. Your animal's happy to get the treat. But now you just become a Pez dispenser. Okay, so they learn a behavior. But trust me, if there's a higher distraction, they're going to ignore you over the treat or whatever the other perceived higher distraction is. That never happens in nature. Nature is very, very intimately connected. Your behavior is who you are. How you show up, how you behave, whether you can be trusted or whether you flip-flop, how you conduct yourself is how you are perceived from nature. In our world, think about the disconnect here. How many people in business will be one way at home and then go out and do something in business, and then their excuse is, well, it's just business. That would never, ever fly in the natural world. It's not a sane way of actually behaving, because in nature, your behaviors are what makes you trustworthy, are what develops others' respect for you, and what makes you an awesome leader. In our human world today, you have people following leaders that offer some of the most horrendous behaviors, that lie about what they just said, that deny it and gaslight as if it never happened. And it's absolutely delusional to the natural world. So what do trainers do? Oh, here, use the treat to lure the animal. Why would you do that? Why would you ask a naturally based being who's totally trusting its instincts and knows whether or not you are trustworthy of being followed or not, whether you can protect that being, whether you will take care of that being? And they're looking at you not listening because it's a representation not of them. It's a representation of you and your misalignment with your own energy. So how in the world have we learned to manipulate with food the animals in our care? I will say, and I said it before, the slaves in our care, without recognizing that the whole point that they come to us is so that we can learn to reconnect with our natural, authentic power. Because what we have and what we're seeing displayed in the world today by our quote-unquote supposed leaders is absolutely atrocious behavior that would never be accepted in the natural kingdom. Not in the land or the law of the forest, and not in the land or the law of nature or the jungle. And it is rampant and it is out of control. And because we have been indoctrinated in our own behavioral training, and never, ever, ever misunderstand that your schooling was indoctrinated behavior training so you stay in line with the narrative that certain people have created. It is not about truly knowing and fully understanding and being educated about who you are. You learned a system and a way to behave so you would fit into the system of the puppet masters. Animals are one of the few beings on this planet that can actually set us free from that system, because they know and they remember the truth. And what's happening with them, they're being removed from the land. They're being poisoned with vaccines and modified foods just like we are. And we are truly losing our connection to our natural, authentic, wild behavior. And when I say wild, I don't mean savagely and ruthlessly going out there and killing people. And for any of you that agree with war, what do you think a war or bombs are? It's savagely killing a large group of people that probably had nothing to do with a dictator's or even a president's decrees. It is absolutely against the laws of nature. And what I see, where people would call me or say to me or speak to me that I'm anthropomorphizing, the reality is I'm actually seeing it clearly. These animals have a much higher level of emotional, psychological, spiritual, and even physical intelligence than we do. Just because you can build a society that will probably be gone within 100 to 200, maybe 250 years, doesn't make you more intelligent. When there's people starving, animals being desecrated, people being abused and traumatized, people living lives of such incredible luxury while other mothers are holding their babies in their arms dying. That's not truly intelligence. There may be higher intellect, but higher intellect does not necessarily lead to the healthiest behaviors. So wrapping all of this up, we really have to understand that the narrative that is taught to us and indoctrinated into us is not the highest form of intelligence that we possess. But connecting with the animals, reconnecting with nature, understanding how the Creator designed this beautiful flow with Mother Nature, now that is the highest form and use of our intelligence, not uploading our consciousness supposedly to an AI cloud. The animals seem to have it, and we need to listen. One of the biggest anthropomorphizers, honestly. And I'm going to use this term not as projecting feelings, emotions, beliefs, but as the portrayal of animals being savage, non-conscious, totally robotic beings that can't control themselves and behave like a bunch of wild beasts. That's how I'm going to use anthropomorphization right here in terms of talking about behaviors. One of the biggest abusers of that are these Animal Planet type shows that show animals behaving in natural ways that look savage and ruthless and, make us afraid of nature. But interestingly, they never seem to show the savagery, the abuse, the torment, the torture, the insanity of how we keep domesticated animals, how we kill them, how they raise animals for canned hunts, how our food actually comes to our table. They never show these things about how savage we are. They only seem to show this about the animals. And there's something really interesting about that. There's something really interesting about refusing to show the truth of the savages that we are, of how much we kill billions of animals a year, of how we waste billions of lives a year, just so we can be fashionable in some circles. They never talk about or show our savagery, because supposedly we're civilized. We don't go out and kill ourselves, but we allow others to do it, and we don't even have the education to connect the dots of the products that we purchase, how they actually got to come into our hands. We don't see the torture. We don't see the horrible lives that these beings live, so that then they get to come to us. Somebody gets to make money. You purchase things that you like. Somebody else gets money. It's, if we knew, and let's take this back to beyond the anthropomorphization, let's take this back to the level of consciousness that you have to keep an animal confined, or to torture an animal through the butchering process, or to breed an animal and take their kids and then sell their children, or impregnate an animal when it's not even a natural impregnation. How delusional have we humans literally become when we can say that that's okay? How disconnected from the actual truth and reality. And now we're talking about we're the most intelligent species. How disconnected have we become from the true reality? I'm going to even stretch this to humans. We've been indoctrinated that this whole vaccine thing and the germ theory is the thing, right? How disconnected have parents become from the truth? How deeply indoctrinated have we become, and how much has the truth been hidden in plain sight from us, that we give our babies over to these doctors? That, I'm sorry if you're a doctor and you took a Hippocratic oath. I'm thinking it's the Hippocratic oath, but you took a Hippocratic oath to do no harm, and you've allowed these institutions that are pretty much funded by Big Pharma to convince you and indoctrinate you that it's okay to give a child before the age of 2 72 vaccinations which have never been fully tested, and then you watch children's brains catch on fire and say it wasn't the vaccine because you're in such denial that you're the one that actually gave the shot because you were indoctrinated by the actual industry that told you that that shot was safe and you don't question it. How disconnected have we supposedly superior beings who have the most intelligence on the planet? How disconnected have we become from what goes into our bodies, from the sources that are giving those things to us? What's going into our animals' bodies, what's going into our children's bodies, what's going into the air we breathe. You cannot convince me that we are truly the most intelligent species when these are the byproducts of what we're producing that are harming our earth, that are harming all the animals, that are harming ourselves. When you look at the indigenous cultures, the Native Americans said, we're going to look at things for the next 7 generations. Based on what just happened in the last 3 years, I don't even know if we're going to have another 7 generations. Honestly, I really don't. And I don't know if we're going to have 7 generations that aren't AI infiltrated. I don't know if we're going to have another 7 generations of actual humans, free to be conscious, free to be thinking, free to be feeling, free to be creating heaven on Mother Earth the way we were intended. Now, the animals have never messed with any of this stuff. They are much more of a pure connection with this earth, with themselves, with their souls, and what they have to teach us. You see, they're already the enlightened masters. A lot of enlightened masters, they don't speak a lot. They speak when they need to. They speak to enlighten others. But they don't babble on mindlessly. They pay attention to the cycles and the rhythms of the earth. They pay attention to little subtle changes that are happening. And they connect the dots. That's their way of survival, and that's their way of thriving. We see in business today things and we go, okay, I got to pivot. But it's like, wait a second, you're pivoting and then you're going to have to pivot again and pivot again and pivot again. Why are you not realizing, hey, something is not right in the state of Denmark? I'm saying that as a broad generalization. But if something's not right, why are we not addressing it at the root cause? See, when you get too complicated because of money and greed and trying to outsmart the quote-unquote system, you lose touch with keeping it simple. And in all of my years of all of my experience with the animals and my basic practice of Qigong, the one thing that keeps coming back over and over and over and over is keep it simple. Because if you look, if you ever watch the movie Contact, and at the very end of the movie they talk about the principle of Occam's razor, the simplest answer is usually the most correct. So if you're going to pay attention to all of the divisions, all of the separations, all of the fighting, all of the false narrative, instead of going back to the truth and the simplicity of nature, you're never going to actually get it. Because it's really, really simple, and the animals know how to remind us and teach us of that. What do you think?